This is The Open Podcast, where your host, Sander Mangel, and his guests share strategies and insights to help digital agencies thrive in a changing world.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the show for digital agencies who want to grow smarter, sell better, stay adaptable in a fast-moving market. I'm Sander Mangel, solutions architect, consultant, and founder of Open Commerce.
And I'm Katie Wilson, partnerships manager and enablement specialist. Each episode, we tackle a new challenge that agency teams face, ranging from sales and strategy through to project delivery.
And today's topic is one that gets both exciting and risky for agencies. It's adopting emerging tech early. So we're talking about the pros and cons of jumping on new e-commerce platforms, marketing technologies, and other digital solutions before they become mainstream, at least in the market that you are in, right? They might already be bigger somewhere else, but entering a new market.
Absolutely. And from both of our backgrounds, we've had really extensive experience with this, working with multiple angles, from working with platform companies that are entering new markets and trying to carve out a space for themselves, and then also to help working directly with either agency partners or technologies to adapt those platforms and to then build a successful business and a successful practice around them.
Exactly. And I think there's a real tension here between, the opportunity of getting in early versus the risk of betting on the wrong horse, or even betting on the right horse, but just the fact that you still have to train the horse, feed it and all that, right, without getting an immediate term of a return of investment. I don't think it's as simple as early adoption always is good or wait until things are more stable. I think there's a real balance to be found there.
Completely. And it is a challenge which various different agencies are facing, and certainly in the experience that we've had, I think there is different ways to tackle this, but it is definitely very rewarding once you've done so. So we wanted to dedicate an entire episode to this topic, sharing various different tips and tricks with you.
Yeah, and I think first it's very important for us to understand how platforms themselves approach expansions, right, into new markets. This gives maybe the agencies more crucial context on framing their own decisions. These kinds of decisions for platforms are often taken over months, even years to move into a market. They have different stages. There are different signals to watch out for where a platform is in their path. So I think it helps to give that perspective. Katie, from your experience, what drives platforms to enter a new region or market?
Question. I think firstly, platforms don't, or in my experience, they don't just randomly decide to expand. They've normally got a plan and a strategy around it. So it is calculated. And they're typically looking for one of two things. First off, they are wanting to see organic growth signals. So what that means is they're monitoring user behavior, adoption trends. And that means like if there's a significant number of users or business in a particular region, let's say Europe, for example, and they're signing up, they're engaging or hacking their way onto the platform, maybe without any local support or localization, then that is definitely a strong pull factor. It's telling them that there's already latent demand, and entering that new market could definitely accelerate growth with relatively low risk. Secondly, they're evaluating potential market size and strategic alignment, and that often will involve deep market research. So they will look at how big is that total addressable market? Are there gaps in the competitive landscape? Is there a cultural fit or even operational fit within their existing capabilities? And sometimes it is opportunistic. So, for instance, they might see a competitor that's gaining traction in that region and decide that they can't afford to sit it out. But I would also add in a third driver, partnership and ecosystem opportunities. So if there are strong local partners, potentially partners that they've got in another region that they feel that they could segue through to that new region they're looking to go into. So it could be agency, it could be a tech provider, payment processor, that will definitely make it easier for them to enter and scale in that region, and that can influence the timing. So to sum that up, platforms rarely expand alone, they're just looking for leverage.
Yeah, and I think we've seen most platforms, at least in Europe and the US, kind of make the same moves, right? I think a lot of the European platforms are eyeing the US as this vast untapped potential where there's just such a massive potentially addressable market. And then US companies are definitely looking at Europe, normally either at the UK as kind of this in-between point where they can jump into with the same language but a bit closer to the mainland, or Germany. I think that is a very popular country to start in just because of the size of the economy, get your foot in the door that way. I think in Europe itself, Dutch companies are probably looking at Germany. I think France is a very interesting market for any platform. But again, there we see it's just very hard to get into that market, right? The French like French-speaking people, French products, French everything, more than any other country, I'd say. So I think there are patterns, and I think everyone's more or less following the same. So that's definitely interesting.
Absolutely. And I think when a platform sees strong organic signals and they identify that there's a sizable market opportunity, that's when you're going to see real investment. So, for example, things like building out that local team, bringing in a salesperson, bringing in maybe business development, marketing, that will follow with customer success. So building out that local team and local infrastructure, tech support, launching region-specific marketing campaigns, so not one size fits all, there's going to be nuances, and then maybe developing tailored product features, so bringing in extensions that work in that region or specific local features that are available for that region. But on the flip side of that, if they're just entering to test the waters, it might be more of like a lightweight approach. So they might have limited resources. They might look at more experimental partnerships to start with, and maybe a one-size-fits-all market strategy. That doesn't necessarily mean they're not serious, but it does suggest that agencies might need to temper their expectations and also be ready to work a bit harder to co-create that value. So there's definitely a bit of a herd mentality among platforms. If one major player makes a move into a market and sees traction, others will often follow suit quite quickly. So if there's agencies that can spot those patterns early and position themselves as a strategic enabler, they're going to be in a really strong place.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point you have there, right? It really also depends on the company. If they are comfortable with not being centralized, if they're comfortable with giving up some of that control to a local team. And I think in Europe, it's a little less challenging to maybe have a Dutch-speaking salesperson in a German company or vice versa. I see that a lot, but especially if you go from US to UK, for example, you have time zone, there's just such a different culture, right? And there the company really needs to be willing to give up that control, I guess. So I guess as an agency, you really do need to understand where the platform is in their expansion journey, right? Before you decide to hitch your wagon onto them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as an agency, you don't really want to commit your time, which is precious, and your resources only to find out that 6 months later, the platform is pulling back or they're pivoting. So it's really essential, wherever possible, to understand from those key the key stakeholders that you work with at that platform where they are in that expansion journey. And that really means asking very direct strategic questions early on. For example, what's their multi-year plan for your region? Are they committing headcount to build that local team, or are they running things remotely from the headquarters? Have they allocated budget specifically to marketing campaigns, to enablement and training, to partner support to help you get up and running in your market? And probably most importantly, like, are they looking for long-term partners, or are they just trying to hit sort of short-term growth targets? I think the answers to those questions are going to reveal whether you're looking at a serious sustained investment, or it's just a pilot project with maybe limited upside. So knowing that early on helps you make smarter decisions really about where you're going to place your bets and how much to invest in that relationship.
Yeah, and I think to that point, having been on the platform side, no platforms tend to be quite opportunistic when it comes to expansion. So I think it also makes sense to look a little bit at the ideal partner they have in their home market, right? to understand if you are a potentially interesting partner for long term, or if this is just more for them a way to get a foot in the door. Right? If they are only used to working with big partner agencies, 200 people plus, and they're coming to you as a small boutique 10 people agency in a new market, probably probably they are just talking to you to get a first foot in the door, get a first agency side up to handle a client project, because the bigger ones might not be interested yet. Doesn't mean that you don't want to engage with them, but I think it does give some food for thought on how durable that relationship is, right? And how well they might work together with you. What are maybe some of the other red flags that you've seen, Katie, to watch out for in the platform's expansion plans?
Completely. So thinking about what we've just spoken about, either getting vague answers to those questions, so vague timelines, vague commitments, if they can't give you some of those specific, maybe not necessarily dates, but like milestones, I would say, or idea of budget for your region, then they probably most likely won't have a good internal alignment or a serious commitment yet. And also a serious lack of localization investment. You know your market, you know what's going to work best. So if they're not translating their materials, their assets, documentation, etc., they're not adapting to local regulations or things like with extensions, are they supporting regional payment methods? If they're not doing those things, or you don't have visibility of those things, then they're probably not going to be very serious about proper market entry, and that's going to give you some red flags. And then no local team or local partner manager to help support that as well. So if your region that you're in is being managed remotely from a headquarter, and it's maybe their side responsibility, from my perspective, that's a real clear signal of limited commitment, and you're probably going to be then left on your own to run demos, technical calls, etc., and you might not necessarily have the full experience or support to be able to deliver that successfully.
Yeah, and I think that is a very important point, right? If the platform doesn't pick up on that, all the heavy lifting is left to the partner agency, right? Going to events, going to conferences, paying for the booth, doing those sales calls, doing the for all I care cold calling, right? And that is a serious commitment that you need to make as an agency, especially if there's no budget from the platform. And I have seen agencies get burned when they went all in on platforms that ultimately decided to pull back from certain markets. I think it happens more often. It can happen when there's a strategic change in the company, or when they bring on new leadership. It might just be that they end up deprioritizing a market, which it can always happen. But I think when they enter a new market, you need to make sure that they're at least there for 3 years, right, to get a bit of traction.
Completely. But it actually happens more often than people realize. It does, especially the last few years. I think we've seen this actually quite a lot, and it's really painful to see, especially if you as an agency have invested in training, certifications, marketing, maybe even hiring somebody specifically with your platform marketing expertise. That's a lot of cost and a lot of time. So it's really painful to see, but it definitely happens a lot more than people think it does.
Yeah, I think especially post-COVID, we saw like all these e-commerce platforms moving into new markets during COVID, right? Rising tides and all that. And then post-COVID, they figured out that maybe e-commerce was there to stay, but in less of a boom than it was during COVID. And a lot of markets that were centralized again into a UK office, or I know what you mean.
Completely. Well, so where's the real investment? And this is a good segue really into that next part of the podcast today. So we want to look at the real investment that's required for early adoption. And that really just goes way beyond sending a developer to get certified, wouldn't you say?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think getting certified is a first step, but probably the easiest step. And I think it's a big misconception that agencies tend to have, right? Just get the developer trained up and he'll start delivering on projects. And I think there is much more to that basically affects the whole team of an agency.
So from your experience working as open commerce and working with various different agencies, what do you think, like the full investment picture, what does it really look like?
Yeah, I think if we look at open commerce and how we approach new platforms, but also the the platform companies that we worked for that approach new partners. It's definitely, getting those developers certified, fine, that helps, or at least, and that's maybe also a topic. It's not just getting certified, but having them be trained, right? Certification is one thing, you get a badge, great, but you want to make sure that they get proper training. And then I think another one is pre-sales. It's very hard to sell a new project that you've never worked with. First of all, you wouldn't even be able to do a proper demo. You probably don't know how to estimate that project, what is possible and what isn't possible, what is out of the box and where you might need to do some custom work or use a third-party vendor. So it's the sales team that needs to get trained up. A developer needs to get trained up to do pre-sales support. I think it's creating internal process, and we've seen that a lot with, for example, on-prem solution companies switching to more SaaS-oriented tools, right? It's different. What we hear often is, it's not as customizable, or it works different. It does, and there's pros and cons to that. But that's a real shift in thinking, I think, that the company needs to do, that the team needs to do. It'll be tooling that you need to adapt. A lot of agencies have built accelerators on their current platforms, right, to get certain industries going fast, which they need to rebuild. There is educating potential clients about the new approach, your project managers. And I think the biggest one that is often forgotten or underestimated, it's eating that reduced margin or even negative margins on the first project or projects while you're learning, right? It's ideally you try to do this with a simple project, but still there is complexity, and it might take days to figure out even the most basic things. And I do think that you can kind of negate some of those risks, but it is a commitment that you need to do and that the whole company needs to be on board with.
Totally. And you have to view those initial projects as their investments. They're not profit centers. So you are essentially subsidizing your team's learning curve, but you're also laying the foundation for a future competitive advantage. So think of it more as like building infrastructure, the early pain, the extra hours, unexpected bugs, internal confusion. That's the cost of developing internal IP, reusable assets, hard-won expertise that others simply won't have when they come in later. So you're not necessarily just executing a project, but you're codifying approaches, you're refining your delivery model, and even shaping what kind of good looks like in that new ecosystem.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've seen a lot of companies also try to alleviate some of that pain by hiring third parties from the platform's home market, right? Mm-hmm. That already have that experience. There, the risk is that you end up basically funding them and not learning anything yourself internally, right? Yeah. So I think in general, I will always advocate for team placement in that case, right? Taking on board one or two of their developers, being very explicit about the fact that you want to learn to do this yourself, right? You don't want to be reliant on them. Of course, there's always an opportunity to share in the profit of any project, but you need your developers to learn how to tackle the challenging parts of a build. You need your project management team to understand where to identify the risks and how to do estimates. So I think that is a real risk of becoming basically addicted to a third party delivering your projects. Yeah. And then there's also the opportunity cost to consider, of course. So those same resources could be delivering more profitable projects and technologies you're already expert in, right? And especially for agencies that want to be multi-platform, it is hard to get rid of that habit to always build it on the initial platform that you trained up on, right? Because every estimate you do, guess what? That platform that you're already an expert in came out as the best solution just because you know it better. So I think there's a need to cultivate a strong ambassadorship for every platform within your company to make sure that the new platforms also get the projects that are a good fit with them.
Yeah, it can't just be a shiny object decision. It has got to be strategic. And every hour that your team is spending ramping up on the new platform, it's an hour that they're not bidding on technologies where you already have a high efficiency and healthy margins. So then the question becomes, what's the long-term upside? Are you entering a space with strong growth potential? where early expertise will set you apart? Or are you chasing a trend that might not align with your core business or your client base? So you really have to weigh the opportunity costs carefully. And sometimes the right call is not to jump in. Maybe not yet. Maybe don't be an early adopter. But when the strategic fit is strong, so say, for example, the platform complements your current offering, or you know your clients are moving in that direction, then it might be worth the short-term pain for the long-term positioning. But the key is being intentional. Don't just ask, can we do this? But ask, should we do this now? And what are we willing to trade off to make that work?
Yeah, good point. And I think this relates back to an earlier episode we did, right, on selecting the right partner. So let's make this maybe concrete. A hypothetical scenario where we are today implementing a MarTech solution for promotions, for example, and a new platform comes out that does everything with AI, because in this day and age, you need that. What kind of a budget would be looking at, Katie?
So at a minimum, you need to look at several layers of investment. So there's both direct and indirect. So I would start with the hard costs, training programs, to your point, certifications. There might be some travel costs associated with that to go to those enablement events, possibly bringing in some external consultants or hiring specialists if the skill gap is too large to close internally. And those costs add up pretty fast. Then there's the time investment, which is often underestimated. You could be talking hundreds of hours across multiple team members. So not just developers, but also project managers, solution architects, and even sales teams who need to understand how to position the new offering. So during that time, productivity will dip and then billable hours will take a hit. You also need to factor in lower margins on the first few projects, so usually the first 2 to 3. That's where you're going to be figuring things out, hitting roadblocks, and probably over-servicing clients to compensate for that. And also the marketing spend. You can't just quietly learn a new platform and expect clients to come knocking. You're going to need to reintroduce yourselves to the market, like updating your messaging, creating thoughtful leadership content, running campaigns, and maybe even, if it's available, to do some co-marketing with the platform. And then there's the ongoing investment. So with emerging technology, especially something that's fast evolving, like, to your point earlier, AI or composable commerce, the pace of change is pretty relentless. And so if you don't stay on top of updates and new features, you're going to lose your edge just as quickly as you gained it. And so for a mid-sized agency, all of this easily translates to sometimes a 6-figure investment. And that's before you start seeing any meaningful return. So positives are the upside can be big, but it's not instant. And you're probably going to have to be ready to play the long game.
Yeah, absolutely agreed. And I would always say that if you're going to estimate a project, just base it on the platform that you know and double or triple it, right? And then thing on the flip side of that, what is very important is, even if you're going to sell it for that normal estimate, still internally take into account the 3 times estimate, right? Make sure that every task that you put in Jira is tripled, basically. Because otherwise you're going to get the frustration that every task takes way longer than estimated. Deadlines are going to get frustrated. Developers are going to get demotivated. So I think that is also very important, right? So even if you're going to fudge around with the budget to make it at least acceptable for the client to sell your first project, you should still internally handle the project with realistic timelines and estimates. I think that's often forgotten.
Yeah.
And I think what is often forgotten too is just the cultural investment that you need to do, right? I mean, your team has to become more comfortable with the technology. The technology might still have bugs, especially if it's a new one, maybe just specific to the market, but there might be limitations. There might be limited documentation. I think all of that takes, if you're an expert in one platform and onboarding on a new platform, you're a junior, and that is sometimes hard to swallow for senior developers.
Yeah, that's a really important point. You need a team that isn't just technically capable, but also mentally prepared, especially to deal with a bit of ambiguity at the start and that rapid change. And let's be honest, like occasional chaos that comes with working on the bleeding edge. But that also means embracing a mindset where experimentation is valued and setbacks are seen more as learning moments, and where people are comfortable saying, we don't have all the answers yet. and that takes some resilience. But platforms in early stages often come with limited documentation. They do. They come with immature tooling, often shifting roadmaps. So to your point, the team needs to be okay with that level of uncertainty and even lean into it and kind of find energy in there. But here's the catch, like not every agency's built that way. So if your culture kind of leans heavily on predictability, tight scopes, low risk delivery, then forcing an early adopter strategy could potentially backfire. And you do risk frustrating your team, burning them out, eroding trust. So I think before diving in, it's definitely worth asking, do we have the right mindset across our organization from leadership level to delivery to thrive in this kind of environment? And so I think taking those things into account is super important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think another thing that is overlooked is the ecosystem factor, right? Is that ecosystem ready in the market that the platform is moving into?
Yeah, completely. It's a huge consideration and it often gets missed. Modern platforms don't exist in isolation. They're part of very much interconnected ecosystems. So that's made up of technology partners, agency networks, developer communities, and wider. So when you adopt an emerging platform, you're not just like choosing the tech, you're stepping into an ecosystem that can either accelerate or, hate to say it, but hinder your success. So it's definitely critical to ask some questions like, who is already operating in this space? Are there reliable integration partners? Are there reliable extensions? And are there complementary tools that you can plug in easily? Is there a partner network that's mature enough to support you if you do hit some roadblocks? And if the platform doesn't yet have those strong alliances or an active community, then you might find yourself solving problems alone, which could kind of slow everything down and increase your costs. But on the flip side, a strong ecosystem can be a massive force multiplier. You can collaborate with other agencies, you could co-sell with tech partners, potentially get referrals, an earlier episode, or even kind of build joint solutions. So what that means is that your team can then lean on shared knowledge, documentation, forums, Slack groups, etc., rather than kind of reinventing the wheel with every challenge. So for me, bottom line is kind of platforms come and go, but ecosystems do tend to signal longevity and momentum. And so if that ecosystem is vibrant and growing, then that's a good indicator that the platform has staying power and your investment is more likely to pay off.
Yeah, I think, for example, an obvious example would be here in the Netherlands, an e-commerce platform moving into this market. I think 95% of the payments in the Netherlands are done with Ideal, right? So if you don't have an Ideal integration into the e-commerce platform, guess what? No one is going to use it. So Katie, how would you evaluate the ecosystem readiness of a new platform? Which factors would you take?
Yeah, so I would start by mapping the critical integration points to your client base and your typical client's needs. So for an e-commerce platform, the priority would be payment gateways for your region and any kind of localization. Also for shipping, so who are the local shipping providers and fulfillment options that are available? Thinking like certain regions like the US have got very complicated tax. And that's not necessarily in every region, but what is that tax calculation and compliance tools that are available? Is there ERP or account system integrations? Are there any marketing technology connections? And once you've started to map those across and align them with your clients, you can honestly assess the current state of those integrations. So are they production ready? Are they properly documented? Are they actually working in your region? And use that as the jumping off point.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's take a look at maybe onboarding those first new clients on the platform that you just adopted, right? That is a challenge. And I think there's sometimes the expectation that a new platform will come into a market, bring a bunch of new leads with them and kind of hand them over to the first partner, right? But that platform has zero brand awareness in the new market, likely, or at least low, is still working on building a team, working on filling their pipeline. So I think often this is a reality check for agencies, a needed one to kind of understand that early days, you are going to work just as hard bringing those new leads in as the platform is. So where do we find those new clients, Katie?
Existing relationships, 100%. And this is really crucial to understand. We've spoken about it before. Your first projects on a new platform will almost certainly come from clients who already trust you. And because you've built that trust and credibility with them, they're probably going to be more likely to try something new because of that trust and that you've earned that trust. So to your point, yeah, a lot of agencies assume that this platform will hand them over loads of leads once you've signed up or get certified. But that is just not how it works in the early stages. And the reality is that most emerging platforms, they're still building their own pipeline, especially in a new region. So they might have a few inbound opportunities, but they're highly unlikely to be at the scale in the verticals you're aiming for. So that's why your internal champions and long-standing clients are really important.
So you're heavily leaning on the trust that you already built with existing clients. You might identify certain pain points they have with their current solution and then try to find alternatives, right? That is basically how you sell it. And it's really down to you trusting that new solution to be right for your clients.
Exactly, yeah. And you need to approach those conversations with total transparency. You don't want to lose that long-term client. So you're essentially asking them to be pioneers with you, which has both risks, but it also has potential rewards for both of you.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm guessing not every client is the right fit for new tech, right? So what would you select them on?
Yeah, completely. So I would be working with your team to identify a certain type of client. So specifically ones who really value innovation. So are they typically ones that are asking for roadmap, new features, functionality, etc. So those that really value innovation and want to have some competitive differentiation. Look for some that have got tolerance for some inevitable bumps in that early adoption process, and also ones that understand the strategic benefits of that new platform. Also think about, do they have budget flexibility? Because they might need to accommodate some uncertainty as you start. And also are they, to ask at the start, are they willing to become reference cases should that project succeed?
Yeah, and I think that last point is definitely the most important one, because those reference cases become crucial for winning future business, basically, right? It's not only up to your relationship with the client anymore, but you can actually show them something. This is a case we built in this market. It's fit for this market with a name that a potential client might know. So given everything that we discussed, let's get strategic. How should agencies approach the decision about adopting early strategy?
Yeah. So
wait. So let me redo. Given everything we discussed, Katie, how should agencies approach the decision about early adoption?
Sure. When you're considering early adoption, you really need to approach it as a strategic investment. It really isn't just a technical decision. And I would say there's several key dimensions that I'd recommend that agencies evaluate. So the first, strategic alignment. Does this platform fit with your agency's long-term vision and core strengths? As we've spoken about, it's easy to get excited about tech, but if it pulls you too far from your core competencies or business model, then it could be a distraction rather than a growth lever. The second is the client impact potential. So ask yourself, will adopting this platform meaningfully improve outcomes for your clients, whether it's faster time to market, improved personalization, more scalable architecture? There needs to be a clear, compelling benefit that aligns with your clients' real-world challenges. Competitive differentiation as well. So will this set you apart in the market? Early adoption is hard work, so it should really lead to an edge. So whether that's being the first certified partner in your region, offering proprietary accelerators to your point, or winning kind of thought leadership credibility. So think about that competitive differentiation. I'd say number 4 would be technical feasibility. So do you have foundational skills or realistic plan to build them? And that doesn't just include your developers, but also your architects, your project managers, pre-sales. Without technical readiness, everything downstream is going to get harder. Also, resource requirements. Be honest, can you afford the investment? We spoke about it earlier. It's not just the money, but it's also that time and attention ongoing. And that can be a 6-figure commitment for mid-sized agencies. So it's really critical to understand the full scope and the timeline of what that success actually requires. And then really vendor viability. Is the platform company you're investing in, are they financially stable? Are they well funded? Are they showing signs of traction in the market? You don't want to really bet heavily on that partner that might not be around in 2-3 years' time. So look at their leadership, their funding, client momentum, and roadmap clarity. And finally, and I would say this is especially important in Europe, regulatory compliance. Platforms operating here, they need to take GDPR, AI regulations, and data sovereignty really seriously. If they don't have solid answers on compliance, and that's a red flag, no matter how exciting the tech is.
I think a lot of developers out there will be very sad that none of your 7 points cover sexy new tech as a selection criteria. But yeah, I think that's a good point, right? It is not just about it's easier to develop in, or it is more up to date, or it seems easier to update, or what have you. There are some serious business considerations to throw against when choosing a new platform to support for your clients.
Yeah, completely. And I would also add that agencies should also consider like a phased adoption approach rather than like all at once. So starting with that exploration and evaluation. So maybe like assigning a small team, for instance, to learn about the platform, assess the platform, maybe go to like if they have a partner day, or if they're doing some kind of like free sessions or webinars, etc., to really validate and get those proof of concept, and then maybe to develop like an initial go-to-market hypothesis. Then at that stage, I would move to pilot implementation with a suitable client like we've spoken about. So that would very much be like a controlled first project. And if you can, then to try and secure enhanced support from the platform, and also documenting your learnings like really meticulously. Next would come practice development. So training additional team members, formalizing either a process internally or formalizing what your service offerings are. And of course, like if we have got successful clients, to develop case studies and then marketing materials to generate more opportunities going forward. And then as you expand on that client base, then that's time to scale and optimize. So thinking about optimizing your delivery efficiency, maybe to develop some specialized either accelerators or IP. And I think that very measured approach will help to de-risk while also build genuine capability in that platform.
Yeah, I think that is a good and sustainable approach. From my own experience, and that is pretty recent actually now, is we are evaluating the SaaS, the relatively new SaaS offering of one of the platforms out there. And what we basically have done is select one developer that is quite comfortable with learning new things and whose skills align with the new tech stack. Me, myself, I'm involved, but also some other people in the company. We're basically going through the motions, reading the docs, joining partner calls, watching videos, trying to train up on the platform. We're actually trying to rebuild an earlier shop we built on the original platform, kind of to also have those real life use cases, bumping into many different challenges and then meticulously documenting them as well, right? So we tried to, add a text to the login page. And we couldn't because we were missing a certain slot or that kind of stuff. And at the same time, what we're also trying to do is build out SOPs, right? Okay, how does this behave when we need to launch it in production? Or how do we keep track of changes? How do we set it up locally, right? Do we have a Dockerized environment? We are looking at certain estimates that we've done. So for the full test phase, we have made estimates. We had a 4-week program where we had certain tasks. We estimated the tasks. We're tracking how much time it actually takes to do the task. And then subdividing into, okay, this is purely cosmetic stuff. These are integrations. Integrations are way harder on this platform. Okay, fine. Right. So it's really creating that muscle memory of working with this new platform. And then at the same time, we're involving sales and our partner manager at that platform to kind of talk about opportunities, right? Can we maybe build some of the integrations that are missing at the moment? Or are there early adopter clients that both the agency and the platform are serving that might want to come on board and invest a little bit more because there's a benefit for them, or they might end up being case study. Ultimately aiming to have a successful launch of a first project, that will probably pay a little extra for that first project, but then also hopefully being on stage on their next year's partner event and showing off what you have done, right? So it's really it's a holistic approach, and I am tracking my hours on this project, and it is a lot. It is a lot.
But it sounds a lot more sustainable than trying to transform overnight. So that's definitely the right approach.
Absolutely. Well, I think we're getting to the end. We've been pushing this episode. It's a long one. Thank you all for tuning into the Adaptive Agency podcast. I would love to hear some of your experiences out there on what you've run into, maybe some fails, maybe some wins. Which platform burned you? Which platform really helped you succeed? If you like the episode, make sure to follow us, and good luck with adopting new emerging technologies.